So, I didn't think we'd be talking about this once more, but for all the times we have made videos about this topic, we always say within them that video might be the last time we ever talk about it, until, of course, the next time we talk about it. Enough with the meta commentary on the state of this YouTube channel. Today, we are talking about one of the best hockey players the entire world has ever seen the past 20 years or so, and talking about the idea of heading over to Montreal. No, we're not talking about Patrik Laine, although that's a pretty good guess, but as you can already tell from the title and from the thumbnail, we're taking our sights over to Pittsburgh and talking once more about Sid the Kid Crosby. Because when it comes to all the Crosby Montreal talk, there has been a very distinct commentary surrounding this narrative that has presented itself over the past few years. Hey, Sidney Crosby's dad was a Montreal Canadiens draft pick. As a guy who grew up in Nova Scotia, there was some sort of an affinity towards the Montreal Canadiens. The fact is, Sidney Crosby is in the latter years of his NHL career, and with a contract that expires in 2027, making $8.7 million a year, if Sid were to ask to be traded, you know he would get his wish as soon as possible. Kyle Dubas is not about holding players back and not abiding by their wishes. He's a very player-friendly GM. And so, when it comes to Sid the Kid, there's always been this idea saying that if he wants out, he'll get out, and it would ultimately be up to him to decide where it is that he goes. A la Claude Giroux in 20-whatever it was, a la Vladimir Tarasenko the other year. This is just kind of how it goes, right? And so with Sidney Crosby and the Montreal Canadiens, there's always been some sort of a commentary going around, and I'm not just talking about the video commentaries that we make here on social media. I'm talking about a whole bunch of other people all over the hockey world bringing up this idea as to whether or not Sid could find his way over to Habstown. And the reason we're bringing this idea up once more is because of a clip from BPM Sports Talk Radio from earlier last week. This was posted on December 11th, 2024, and it goes over some comments made by Georges Laraque about Sidney Crosby and how it's actually not impossible that he ends up with the Habs. Sidney Crosby with the Canadiens, it's not impossible. This video will be linked in the description from BPM's Twitter account, and I'll also leave a link in the description to this article published by Elias Adam on HabsFanatics.com, which transcribes the comments made by Georges Laraque. Of course, it translates it into English too, which is very helpful for us. Let's go out there and talk about the article here. Kirby Dach was supposed to become the future second-line center of the Habs, but his performance this season has cast in doubt. With this uncertainty, GM Kent Hughes will need to consider creative solutions to fill this gap, at least until Michael Hage is ready to take on the challenge. The question was raised on BPM Sports, where Georges Laraque and Stefan Gonzalez explored the bold idea of acquiring Crosby. Although it seems unlikely, Georges Laraque believes it is not impossible. This is what the former Crosby teammate had to say. If Crosby brings the Canadiens, and I'm not talking about a Stanley Cup here, but if he brings them to another level for his career and his pedigree, doing that in Montreal, his popularity would skyrocket. I understand it would be surprising to see Sid with the Canadiens, and I agree with you, but there's one thing. For example, when they're on track to miss the playoffs this year, they'll start cashing in on the players they have to begin preparing for the rebuild. The Canadiens have enormous potential, and it would be a great challenge for Sid the Kid. Crosby, it's already been said in the past, I played with him, he loves hockey markets, and Montreal would be perfect for him. It's not as impossible as it seems, Laraque said. And here's the thing, obviously Georges Laraque is not Crosby himself. Anything that Crosby is thinking or pondering or debating, nothing of that is known to Laraque personally. Laraque is just going out there and sharing his idea. But it's very apparent that based off of everything Laraque has learned about this guy, the idea of him going over to Montreal is not all that ludicrous. It would be a hockey market dream, a fever dream, for Sidney Crosby to suit up with that Habs crest on his sweater, and the idea of bringing everything full circle, him and his dad both being Montreal Canadiens at some point, it would be such a great story, and there would be such immense talent brought to the Habs lineup in that way. Obviously, Pittsburgh is on the complete opposite path of the NHL team timeline spectrum, where the Pens are in their final days, the sunset fading out into the distance, whereas the Montreal Canadiens are a bright early morning sun getting ready to sprout all those seeds and bring a beautiful garden to the forefront. Montreal is just kind of waiting for that to blossom and to eventually become the status quo. And so with Sidney Crosby, obviously that helps out the team. He gives that second-line center position a much-needed boost. He is probably better than what Kirby Dach is bringing to the Canadiens right now. Does Sidney Crosby dethrone Nick Suzuki? That's an entire other question. Ultimately, though, the question that I also think needs to be asked here is whether or not Crosby would be more interested in going over to a team like Montreal that would be a rebuilding market, that would use his help to bolster up their short-term success and to help them finally get into the playoffs, or would he be willing to go to a team like Colorado instead, where it's like, hey, they're already a top-tier team, they need nothing, pretty much, they're already good enough to compete and potentially win the Stanley Cup. Crosby would only be an addition to what Nathan MacKinnon, Mikko Rantanen, Ross Colton, Cale Makar, Artturi Lehkonen, Valeri Nichushkin, and Jonathan Drouin are able to provide. Crosby would be an addition there. In Montreal, he would almost certainly be maybe even the second coming of Patrik Laine. That's not to say, of course, that Crosby would score 8 power play goals in his first however many games of the season if he were to be sent over to Montreal, but just the magnitude, what that entire story would look like, how it would play out, and what the narratives would be. Crosby in Montreal, I think, is a much bigger deal than Crosby in Colorado. It's just kind of the way it goes. Same thing could have been said about Jarome Iginla. When he was sent over to Pittsburgh, when he was sent over to Boston, when he was sent over to Colorado, like, okay, he was sent to good teams. He wanted to win a cup. That was not out of the question there for Jarome Iginla. It's not surprising. It's just kind of how things went. But if Jarome Iginla decided to go over to some Canadian market that wasn't Calgary, oh yeah, that would have been a crazy, crazy thought process. So for Sid the Kid, does he go cup chasing or does he go narrative chasing? Or does he just stay in Pittsburgh? These are all realistic ideas, and I want you to let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. What makes you think this will go down the way it goes down? What evidence is there for whatever outcome it is you're predicting? And what are your thoughts on Georges Laraque's assessment of the entire situation here? That Crosby may be on his way out, that Crosby's spot on the Pittsburgh Penguins, while it's always going to be guaranteed, like he's always going to have a home with the Pittsburgh Penguins, the fact is, if the team is just not great, there could be some reason for him to maybe request out. Who really knows? So, article as well as the video interview clip itself will be linked in the description if you want to go out there and verify the sources yourself. Obviously, the source here is just a BPM Sports Talk radio hit. Georges Laraque, of course, former teammate of Crosby, is probably a lot more qualified to talk about the guy than, let's just say, me or you on the internet. And ultimately, that means that we have a big conversation to dive into, right? So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about the idea of Crosby heading over to Montreal. Do you think it's possible? Do you think it will happen? Thoughts in the comment section. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.